Congratulations, Coventry City promoted to the Premier League. What an unbelievable journey it's been. And I could be talking about the last 12 months, could be talking about the last 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 25 years since relegation from the Premier League down to League Two and back up again. Here is, as best as we can, our analysis of an incredible journey and an unbelievable bit of footballing success for Coventry City. George, what a treat to talk about the likely title winners of the Championship this season. What a team.
Yeah, incredible team. And this is the end of, well, it may not be the end, but this is the latest in what's an incredible story because, you know, I was born in 1990. I grew up enjoying football in the 90s, and Coventry City were a part of the Premier League, and it felt like they were belonging there. And for a lot of people, if we were to list the teams that we believe should be in the Premier League, then Coventry would be in it. So for them to fall into League Two, for their fans to go through periods where, you know, having to ground share with Birmingham City and Northampton Town, to, you know, have genuine moments of existential crisis, to have had an ownership group where even when things were going okay on the pitch, things weren't particularly happy or weren't happy at all between the fan base and the owners. Issues with the new stadium when it came to be two, whereas now they are a football club who are owned by Doug King, who own their own stadium, who have an incredible affinity towards the between the fan base and the players, and Frank Lampard and the previous manager Mark Robins as well comes into that too. It has been a success story that, unlike most footballing success stories over the last 10-15 years, you normally just follow the money. And obviously money has come with Coventry City's success. But this isn't a case where a big club fell and a rich benefactor came in and pumped it full of cash and they rose back up. This is a story of season on season improvement, good decision making, smart decisions being made, and a few setbacks over the last 2 or 3 seasons. But now they've done it. And, you know, you saw the scenes in the away end at Ewood once Bobby Thomas scored that equaliser that basically sent them up. Saw the emotion from Frank Lampard. This is a big story and it's a big success.
Yeah, I go back to the 18th of May 2018. They played Notts County in the League Two playoff semi-finals. It was their first season in League Two, and they'd made the playoffs. They drew their first leg 1-1 at home to Notts, and they won 4-1 in the second leg. Maxime Biamou, there's a reason he is a cult hero. 2 goals in that game. Mark McNulty, who scored 25 odd goals that season, scored, as well as Tom Bayliss, who was a young player at that time. They went on to beat Exeter comfortably in the playoff final. That was the start of the ascent, if you like, under Mark Robins. Should we look at this season and look at what they've been, how they've done it? What is the anatomy of Coventry City 25-26?
Wow, I mean, I don't know where you start with that, because it feels like 2 things are true. Firstly, this is the first full season of Frank Lampard being in charge and his coaching staff and Joe Edwards. And, you know, it feels like a massive step was taken when he was appointed last season. But this is also the culmination of season on season growth and success. You know, this is a club who 3 seasons ago lost in the playoff final against Luton Town on a penalty shootout. So we're, you know, inches away from being a Premier League side then. This is a club who were inches away from being in an FA Cup final a season after that, after losing on penalties to Manchester United, where they were, by some accounts, myself included, robbed by VAR at that point. A club who last season at one point relegation threatened, and then made a very difficult decision in terms of the management that wasn't popular with neutrals and the fan base alike, who then went on an incredible run to finish in the playoff semis and have their hearts broken by Sunderland. But this season, you know, you look at Frank Lampard, and as I say, like, you and I were pretty surprised and not overly enthused by the appointment when it was made. It felt like a huge risk. It felt like maybe, you know, and I'm happy to say this now because it wasn't true, like an owner who might have been blinded by stardust rather than looking and making decisions, especially when you had a manager, Mark Robins, who had so much credit in the bank, whatever that means for the work that he'd already done. But Lampard came in with Edwards, and the playing style itself, like my criticism of Lampard previously at Derby was that their playing style was so reliant on this incredibly intense press that worked at times and didn't work at other times. Whereas this Coventry team, to me, feel like a really well-balanced team. They're a team who can often be really aggressive out of possession, but can also sit in their shape happily too, who have an incredible depth of talent within their team as well. Lampard himself, I think, has shown an interesting kind of tactical, a willingness to be flexible with his own in-game tactical decisions as well, as can be seen in a couple of games we'll talk about a bit later. This is also the result of really smart recruitment, where we've seen, Dean Austin, who's in charge of recruitment at Coventry, and his team consistently bring in players from various different backgrounds across Europe, within English football, successfully, and then crucially the selling of Victor Gyökeres and Gus Harmer, two brilliant signings that were made at the time, sold for 50 odd million, and that money reinvested into the playing squad. So when you say what is this team, I think it's a beautiful jigsaw of past and present. Basically, it is the hard work of Robins, and you and I were at the EFL Awards on Sunday night, and one of the first people that Frank Lampard credited when he was up there receiving his Manager of the Year award was Robins himself, because there's no need for animosity. Like, this couldn't have been done without one man's work. And, Lampard credited his amazing relationship with the owner, Doug King, many, many times in his speech. Had Mark Robins given similar speeches through his tenure, he wouldn't have been able to do that, because, it was a completely different situation at that time. The fans themselves, when Lampard were appointed, were understandably a bit miffed, given the high esteem that Robins was held in. And it's a brave decision for a new owner to make. And we shouldn't be overly outcome biased here, and shouldn't just say, well, everything's worked out well, so that it was the right decisions. But when you look now at the decisions that Coventry City have tended to make over the period of time since Doug King came in, they've been pretty measured. And I think in this instance, it was a really good bit of talent ID to spot someone who'd been written off pretty early on in his managerial career. But managers are allowed to change and to develop and to learn, and I think we've seen someone who's done that.
I like that you just used the phrase talent ID, because I think that has to be detailed when it comes to this Coventry City journey. Recruitment is crucial, and recruitment doesn't just mean buying players. It means knowing when to sell them. It means coach and manager recruitment as well. Recruitment is a broad term, and they've clearly massively succeeded, and that's been the bedrock of their success. It's why they've been able to win promotion to the Championship, to the Premier League, as a non-parachute payment team. If we go back to 2019, they were in League One, and that summer they signed Marco Morosi, Michael Rose, Liam Walsh, Sam McCallum on loan, Matty Godden and Callum O'Hare on loan, and they jumped from 8th to 1st. They won the league. It was the COVID season. They won it on PPG. It wasn't one that they could celebrate massively. Upon promotion, they bought Gus Harmer for 1.35 million as they joined the Championship. They also signed Callum O'Hare on a free. And that season in January, their first in the Championship, they loaned in Victor Gyökeres from Brighton. He scored 3 goals in 750 minutes. Not a great return, but it was enough for them to activate the buy clause that summer. They finished 16th in their first season in the Championship. The next summer, the one where they activated Gyökeres' buying clause, they've already got O'Hare and Harmer at this point. They also signed Ben Sheaf from Arsenal's under-23s. They finished 12th that next season. They backed the team. Summer 2022, they only sold Dom Hyam, really, and they only signed Casey Palmer on a free, and then a lot of loan deals. They mostly stuck with what they had and tried to develop the same team for a second season. And that was the year they made the playoff final, with Harmer sensational, Gyökeres sensational. They lost the playoff final on penalties to Luton. And they had to sell Gyökeres and they had to sell Harmer. You can't just hold on to players like that forever. They made 30 plus million quid. And that summer, for less money than they sold those two, they signed 8 players for fees who are all still key parts of this squad that has won promotion 3 or so years later, 2 or 3 years later. Haji Wright, Ellis Sims, Milan van Ewijk, Efron Mason-Clark in the January, Victor Torp in the January, Liam Kitching, Bobby Thomas, Tatsuhiro Sakamoto. All 8 crucial parts of this team paid for by the sale of 2 players. And I think in this way we see we're obsessed with individual talent. Of course we are. Harmer and Gyökeres are amazing to bring up. But Harmer and Gyökeres were incredible and they were enough to take Coventry to 5th. But winning the league needs 12, 13, 14, 16 players, and selling 2 and buying 8 that can be part of a squad makes the team stronger. They finished 9th, which was an understandable drop-off after losing those 2. Then they added Rodoni, Thomas Asante and Grimes. That was the icing on the cake. Lost the playoff semi-final in 5th last season. This year, champions. And the big signing of this summer was a man called Carl Rushworth. Now, Coventry, best attacking team in the league on the numbers, on the eye test, on the goals scored. There's no real argument there. Defensively, they haven't been absolutely watertight.
No.
But they have had lovely Carl Rushworth in nets.
Yeah, and this is, I would say, is the second time you've seen, last season we saw Burnley go up with James Trafford in goal, who shouldn't have been playing in the Championship. And I think Carl Rushworth's probably going to have a similar trajectory now where he'll be a Premier League keeper going forward. Coventry fans will hope with them next season, so we'll have to see. And yeah, there is... The interesting thing about Coventry's recruitment is it is good and it is impressive. But the list of players you read out then, I think what kind of sets Coventry apart from other teams, certainly at Championship level, isn't just talent ID, but it's the retention of talent, if that makes sense. There isn't this demand for players to either light it up straight away or get sold. Like you mentioned, Efren Mason-Clark, who's been a big player this season, but was in and out in his first season, but given time to grow. Ellis Sims, who came in with a huge reputation and maybe struggled initially, or maybe has struggled throughout his Coventry City career to have the kind of impact they hoped he would have, but he's still a big player for them when he comes in. And often this season, he's been first choice ahead of Haji Wright on merit. Haji Wright himself, who has shown in flashes what he's capable of, but has now kind of stepped up more this season. Like players who other clubs might have looked to replace, they've said, no, they're part of our squad and we're going to give them the opportunity to progress. And that also means that we don't need wholesale changes in windows. You and I recorded a video last season, shortly after Lampard was hired, I think, where we spoke about Coventry's kind of quite strange decision not to have any loan players last season. And obviously nothing to do with what we said, but it was something they decided to shelve. And this season they were happy to look at loans that would offer value. And Rushworth is one of those. And the core reason to use the loan market is to attract players that you will otherwise not be able to afford or be able to bring on permanent deals. And in Rushworth, they've done that. He's an incredibly talented goalkeeper. He had proven himself at other clubs prior to this loan, but was very young, but now is kind of developing into the keeper that we know. I'm sure he'll be an England international in the relatively near future, and he's already been spoken about as being in squads even in the Championship. A lot of Coventry fans think that he's been their best player this season. His shot stopping is excellent. He's good with the ball at his feet. He's just been a magnificent signing, and the kind of signing that you should be signing on loan, because there's absolutely no way Carl Rushworth is going to sign for a Championship team on a full-time contract. You also look at Matt Grimes, someone who has played an absurd amount of Championship minutes, who doesn't necessarily get the plaudits that he deserves, taken off another Championship club, and has quietly been sensational for them and has allowed them to play in a certain way to stylistically to dominate the ball when they need to. But he's also, he's decent out of possession. He knows his role very well. He's not the fastest, but he brings that kind of experience, and he's been a magnificent captain for them. You look at January, where they needed more legs in midfield. They used a loan market again to bring on Yeka, who's been a brilliant addition. Even if he hasn't played loads of minutes, when he's played, he's been really important. It's just been a success story in terms of knowing where to shop and where to go and get these players and how to go about it. Without the need for a huge turnover window to window. And that's a rarity really at the top end of the Championship.
In terms of how they play, in terms of how they might play next season, how they might look to recruit next season, how they would attack the Premier League and try and replicate what Sunderland and Leeds have done this season, how do you see it going?
I'm intrigued because we've got a manager in Frank Lampard who's managed a lot of Premier League games, which isn't always the case when you get a promoted obviously Daniel Farke had done. I think that's been a big key reason for Leeds going forward this season as to why they've been able to adapt their style of play to suit, because Farke has learned from failure. I think Lampard, albeit it's been at Chelsea, but also at Everton, where things didn't end great, I think he would have learned a lot from those experiences, and will know he's both managed a big club in that league who've come up against recently promoted teams. He's managed Everton, a huge Premier League mainstay, but a team whose expectations and their place in the food chain in the Premier League was a bit lower. So he's kind of done two interesting separate jobs to this, and I think he should know and should understand the need to be a bit cuter in terms of style of play and not look to be too idealistic in that sense. So I think they've got the players to do that. I don't think they, even though they've been relatively possession heavy this season, I think in part that's because of just the better players that they have. I think they rank 4th for possession in the league this season. It wouldn't surprise me at all if we see them adopt a much more pragmatic playing style. And just, the good feeling at the club, I think will see them through. And, the key thing for me is, even though they've had a couple of wobbles, like you think back to that game against Middlesbrough, where the pressure was on Coventry after such a fast start. They've been toppled off the top of the table, people calling it, it's not a wobble, it's a meltdown. And when the pressure was really on, they put in their best performance of the season, won an important game and never looked back. And so that resilience and the ability to kind of see through difficult moments. You even saw it against Blackburn, a game where they were second best for most of the game and still found a way to score that equaliser to take them up. That should set them in pretty good stead for next season. Obviously, they'll need to recruit, and I'm sure they will recruit hard. But as we know, they're pretty good at doing that.
Yeah, there's lots to consider in terms of the squad makeup. Obviously, style of play will have to be the initial consideration, but with Rushworth only being on loan, and I'm sure they would be desperate to try and get him back any which way, but that can't be any guarantee that they will. The goalkeeping department will be a massive, massive area for them to look at. The centre-backs, I mean, they've kind of chopped and changed a bit this season. Bobby Thomas, Liam Kitching, Latibeaudiere have all played a pretty big role. I think as individual players, you could certainly have some concerns about how they might step up to the Premier League. The type of strikers in the Premier League are obviously a completely different beast. At fullback, I think Milan van Ewijk has really earned himself a shot at being a starting right back in the Premier League, and I think he might do well. On the left, Jay Da Silva's done unbelievably well this season and done really well over the last few years to maintain his spot in this team, but I'm sure they'll be looking at left back as an area to recruit. In midfield, Matt Grimes, we have to kind of wait and see whether Matt Grimes, Championship metronome, can be a really effective player in the Premier League as well. I mean, he's such an intelligent player and he's so experienced and he's so good in tight spaces that I do hold out some hope for him, but you have to say that they probably need to surround him with one more massive bloke, basically. Like, if you look at the success that Leeds and Sunderland have had, it'll be hard to ignore the fact that signing really tall, really aggressive athletes has been quite a successful ploy this season. Maybe it'd be the chance they get on Yeka back. I can't remember exactly the terms of that loan deal. And then Rodoni, I'm really excited to see at Premier League level. I think he'll step up really well, but there is a bit of a question mark about where exactly he plays. It might be a bit of a risk for Cov to play with a number 10, which is where Rodoni plays at his best in this Coventry side. Obviously means you've got a bit less of a presence in midfield, and maybe Rodoni will play deeper, but he's probably thrived a bit further forward under Lampard so far. So that's a big question mark. And then, as always, in attacking areas, I think from the Cov fans I've spoken to, that there's not a lot of hope that Haji Wright, Brandon Thomas-Asante, Ellis Sims can be the right players to impact things in the Premier League at the top of the pitch. What I would say is that it's often as much to do with how the team performs as it is the qualities of individual players. And as we've seen this season, they have all kind of taken it in turns to contribute. It'd be asking a lot to do that again in the Premier League, and I'm sure that will be an area of the pitch where they look to recruit. So we'd love to hear from you, Coventry City fans. Hopefully we've done a half-decent job trying to break down exactly what's taken you over the line and got you to the Premier League after an amazing period of kind of regeneration, this incredible ascent back to the top tier of English football. Who knows when we'll be covering Coventry City again, but it's been an absolute pleasure to do so over the last 10 years. So leave us a comment on Spotify or on YouTube. Let us know what you think about some of the stuff that we've talked about and what you want to see the club do this summer in order to try and replicate what Sunderland and Leeds have done. Thank you. Congratulations, Coventry fans. Go well.